I never thought I'd be the guy snooping around his wife's phone. But there I was, accidentally stumbling upon messages that screamed trouble. Can't wait to see you again, one read with a winking emoji that felt like a punch in the gut. I should have confronted her, demanded answers. Instead, I shoved the phone back where I found it and kept my mouth shut. Big mistake. Things got weirder. She, who always rushed home to catch her favorite TV shows, suddenly had a pile of late-night work. Big project. You wouldn't understand, she'd say with a dismissive wave, not even looking up from her laptop. I nodded, pretending to buy it. But inside, my doubts were doing somersaults. One evening, while grabbing a beer with a buddy, he casually mentioned seeing her. Yeah, saw your wife the other night. She was all dolled up at Giorgio's. Quite the fancy dinner. My heart sank. Giorgio's wasn't a place for casual work dinners. And she hated Italian cuisine. Something was off. That's when I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. Felt like a cliché straight out of a bad detective novel. But I needed the truth, no matter how ugly. I handed over a photo of her, and the pie gave me a knowing look. Didn't say much. Just a curt nod and a promise to keep me posted. While waiting for his report, I noticed another red flag. Our joint account, usually steady and predictable, turned into a roller coaster. Fancy clothes, jewelry, hotel bookings, stuff we never splurged on. I confronted her about the expenses. Oh, just treating myself, she said, brushing it off with a laugh. But her eyes, they darted away too quickly. I was trapped in a bad dream, watching the woman I married slip away into a life I didn't recognize. Each passing day twisted the knife a bit more, leaving me to wonder where we went wrong. But deep down, I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. The truth was coming, ready or not. You've got mail, the investigator's message read, as if it were some normal update. But what I saw next was far from normal. Photos of my wife, laughing and cozying up with some slick-haired guy, at a place that definitely wasn't for business meetings. My stomach churned. This wasn't just late nights and fancy dinners anymore. Confrontation seemed like the next logical step. So I waited for her in the living room, photos laid out like a deck of Betrayal on the coffee table. When she walked in, her face went from surprise to fear in a heartbeat. Who was he? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Her response: a well-rehearsed lie. Just a colleague, nothing to worry about. Colleague, my foot. I wanted to believe her, but the photos screamed a different story. Next day, I found myself sitting across from a lawyer, a guy who looked like he'd seen too many broken marriages. What are my options? I asked, hoping there was some easy way out of this mess. He laid it out plain and simple. It wasn't going to be pretty or easy, but I had to protect what was mine. We talked finances, assets, everything that once symbolized our shared life. Now just bargaining chips in a game of betrayal. Just when I thought things couldn't get messier, she dropped another bomb. I've got a business trip this weekend, she announced casually over breakfast. My gut screamed lies. The timing was too perfect, too convenient. Sure, I replied, keeping my suspicions to myself. Meanwhile, I had my investigator on speed dial. The pie's update wasn't a shocker. She's at a resort, he informed me. Sun, sand, and probably a lot more with her colleague. No business conference, no late-night meetings, just a weekend getaway on our dime. The pieces of the puzzle were fitting together, forming a picture I couldn't stand to look at. There I was, stuck in a plot twist of my own life. The woman I thought I knew was living a double life. Each revelation was like a blow, knocking the wind out of me. But I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. It was time to rewrite the script, even if it meant the end of us. The moment you start moving money out of a joint account, you know things have gone south. Real south. That's where I found myself, in a dimly lit bank, feeling like a character out of a heist movie. I was shifting assets, making sure I wasn't left high and dry. Felt underhanded, but then again, so was everything happening in my life. Just when I thought I was alone in this mess, I got a call. Her voice was shaky, yet there was a strange solidarity between us. It was her lover's wife. He's planning to leave me, she spilled, her words laced with betrayal. Turns out, I wasn't the only one blindsided. The enemy of my enemy could be a friend, or at least an ally in this twisted game. Digging deeper, I hit a revelation. Mr. Smooth Operator, my wife's lover, wasn't the wealthy entrepreneur he pretended to be. He was just another hustler looking for a good score. I almost laughed. My wife, with all her sophistication, had fallen for a con. The irony wasn't lost on me. So there we were, the scorned spouses plotting over coffee. It was surreal, teaming up with her to expose our cheating partners. We needed something dramatic, unmistakable. Let's crash their little love fest, she suggested. I couldn't help but smirk. It was bold, brash, and just what this situation called for. The night of the showdown felt like stepping onto a movie set. We timed it perfectly, walking into the restaurant just as they cozied up, lost in their little world. The look on their faces when they saw us, priceless. My wife's eyes were wide-mouthed agape. Hey Lua. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. The scene that unfolded was something out of a reality TV show. Voices raised, accusations flying, the whole restaurant watching. My wife tried to play it off, but her words were empty, hollow. Her lover, all charm gone, was a stuttering mess. The truth was out, naked for all to see. Walking out of that restaurant, I felt a weird mix of triumph and emptiness. We'd exposed them, sure, but what did we really win? Our marriages were in shambles, our partners revealed as strangers. It was a victory, alright, but one that tasted a lot like ash. The night she came back, it was like a storm hit our house. My wife, once the picture of composure, was a mess of fury and embarrassment. Her eyes were wild, her voice a mix of anger and disbelief. How could you embarrass me like that? She yelled, pacing like a caged animal. The irony of her words almost made me laugh. Almost. Morning brought a cold silence. Over breakfast, words unspoken. I slid the divorce papers across the table. They landed with a thud heavier than any word I could muster. Her hands trembled as she picked them up, her eyes not meeting mine. The finality of that moment hung in the air, thick and unyielding. Her plea was a whisper of desperation. Can't we try again? But it was too late. The woman I once loved was a stranger. Her words empty echoes of a past long gone. No, I set my voice steady. It's over. I saw something break in her then. A final realization that there was no going back. The divorce proceedings were a blur of legal jargon and cold formalities. But when her affair came to light, the murmurs in the courtroom said it all. Her reputation, once spotless, now tainted with whispers and sideways glances. She sat there, shrinking under the weight of every judgmental stare. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But life wasn't done with her yet. The scandal spilled over into her professional life. She was a high flyer, her career as pristine as her public image used to be. But not anymore. Word got out, and the company she poured her heart into showed her the door. Bad for business, they said. She tried to fight it, but what chance did she have? Her affair had become more famous than any of her accomplishments. Watching her world crumble, I realized something. This wasn't just about revenge or justice. It was a tragedy, two lives unraveling from a single thread of betrayal. As much as I wanted to hate her, to revel in her downfall, I couldn't. Because once upon a time she was my everything. And now we were both nothing but memories in the ruins of what used to be. It was like watching a house of cards collapse, slow and painful. The news came one morning, almost as a footnote in the mess that had become our lives. Her lover, the man for whom she risked it all, returned to his wife. Just like that, he slipped back into his old life, leaving her stranded in the wreckage of their affair. She called me, voice cracking, looking for some kind of solace or understanding. But what was there to say? We were past words, past any kind of comfort. The day of the settlement was surreal. The house we had turned into a home, the car we road tripped in, the savings we had built together, all mine. The gavel came down, and with it, the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. She walked away with barely enough to start over. A part of me wanted to feel victorious, but victory shouldn't feel this hollow. Moving day for her was a quiet affair. I watched from the window as she loaded her life into a rental truck, each box a piece of the world we had built. Her new place, a far cry from the home we shared, was small, unassuming. It was a stark reminder of how far she had fallen, from lavish dinners and designer clothes to counting pennies for rent. I thought her friends would stick by her, but I was wrong. One by one, they turned their backs, choosing to side with me. Maybe they were never really her friends to begin with. She tried to reach out, to salvage what was left of her social life. But it was like reaching into a void. No one wanted to associate with the woman who had so publicly fallen from grace. Her financial struggles were the talk of the town. Credit card debts, unpaid bills, the glamorous lifestyle she once flaunted was now her albatross. I'd hear snippets from mutual acquaintances, each tale more pitiful than the last. She was juggling jobs, trying to keep her head above water. The woman who once spent without a second thought was now drowning in a sea of debt. In the quiet of my now too large house, I couldn't help but reflect. We had loved, laughed, and dreamed under this roof. Now it was just a building echoing with memories of a life that was no more. She was out there struggling, fighting for every inch of her new life. And here I was, surrounded by the ghosts of our past, wondering if winning was worth the cost. Life has a way of coming at you fast, especially when you're not looking. It was a casual conversation, nothing special, but the news hit me harder than I expected. She was working herself to the bone, juggling multiple jobs just to scrape by. The image of her, once so poised and confident, now hustling day and night, was hard to shake off. I heard she was reaching out, trying to mend fences with old friends, but they wanted no part of it. The doors that used to swing wide open for her were now firmly shut. People she considered close, friends she had laughed and celebrated with, now turned their backs. It was a loneliness I wouldn't wish on anyone, not even her. The stress was taking its toll on her, physically and mentally. Rumors had it that her health was in decline. I pictured her, once vibrant and full of life, now worn down by the weight of her choices. It's strange how life can take such drastic turns, how quickly health can deteriorate under the burden of stress and heartache. Meanwhile, I was trying to move on, to find some semblance of happiness in the chaos that had become my life. I started dating, meeting someone who brought a semblance of normalcy. It felt good being out, laughing and enjoying company again. We went to places, unafraid of who saw us. It was liberating, yet somewhere deep down, a twinge of guilt lingered. Then came the night we all ended up at the same restaurant. The odds must have been astronomical, but there we were. I was with my date, laughing over a glass of wine when I saw her. She tried to hide it, but I could see the pain in her eyes, the way her smile faltered when she saw us together. She looked smaller somehow, diminished and fragile. For a moment our eyes met, and I saw a glimpse of the woman I used to know. It was a look that stayed with me, haunting in its sadness. That night, lying awake, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. The choices we made, the paths we took, all leading to this moment. There she was, struggling to keep her head above water, while I was out, trying to fill the void she left. We were two sides of the same coin, spinning out of control, caught in a dance of our own making. It was a sobering thought, a realization of the price of our decisions, the cost of the lives we chose. There's something about hitting rock bottom that strips away all pretenses. The news came to me like a cold slap. Her own parents had turned their backs on her. They blamed her for the failed marriage, for the scandal, for everything. It was a harsh sentence from the very people who should have been her safety net. But then again, betrayal does strange things to people, even to parents. Amidst this storm, she reached out to me. Her voice was different. Not the confident, assertive tone I was used to, but something frail, almost scared. She wanted to meet, talk, maybe find a way to mend things. But how could I? Too much had happened, too many words had been spoken, and too many wounds inflicted. I couldn't just erase it all. So I told her no as gently as I could. The line went silent, and in that silence, I felt a chapter closing, one that would never be reopened. It wasn't long before I heard she was selling her things. A mutual friend let it slip, voice low and uncomfortable. She's selling off her stuff, man. Furniture, clothes, even her jewelry. It painted a grim picture. The once proud woman I knew, now hawking her possessions just to stay afloat. It was like watching someone drown in slow motion. Then came the eviction. I didn't hear it from her, of course. News like that doesn't get shared, it gets whispered in hushed tones. She'd fallen behind on rent, too far to catch up. So they kicked her out just like that. The thought of her, alone and desperate, being forced out of yet another home was jarring. I wondered where she would go, what she would do. The answer wasn't long in coming. Another slice of gossip from the grapevine. She had moved into a rundown motel on the outskirts of town, a place where dreams go to die, where the forgotten and the lost find their refuge. The image of her in that dingy, cramped room was a stark contrast to the life we once shared. It was a fall from grace like no other, a descent into a kind of despair I couldn't even begin to fathom. Lying in my bed that night, in the quiet of the house that once echoed with our laughter, I couldn't shake off a feeling of profound sadness. It wasn't just about her downfall, or about the bitter end of our marriage. It was about how life can take such unexpected, tragic turns. How the person you once loved, the one you thought you knew, can become a stranger, struggling to survive in a world that's turned its back on them. It was a sobering reminder of how fragile our lives really are. How quickly everything can change, leaving nothing but memories and what-ifs. Life's got a cruel way of spreading news you don't want to hear. It started as whispers, then grew into full-blown rumors. Word on the street was she'd taken up jobs that raised eyebrows, the kind you don't list on a resume. It was hard to digest, thinking of her, once so proud and dignified, now scraping the bottom of the barrel. Then fate, with its twisted sense of humor, put her right in my path. I was at the store minding my own business when I saw her. It took me a moment to even recognize her. The woman I once knew with her perfect hair and flawless style was gone. In her place was someone who looked like they'd been chewed up and spat out by life. Her eyes, once so bright and full of fire, were now dull and tired. It was like seeing a ghost, a reminder of a past life. She saw me too. There was this moment, just a split second, when our eyes met. Time stood still and then it all came crashing down. She approached me, hesitantly, as if she wasn't sure of her welcome. "I need help," she said, her voice a mix of desperation and shame. It was a plea, raw and unfiltered. But what could I do? Too much had happened, too many bridges burned. So I did the only thing I felt I could. I walked away. The look in her eyes as I turned my back. I'll probably remember that for the rest of my life. I thought that was the end of it, but life had more in store. A mutual friend called me one evening. "She's in the hospital," he said, his voice heavy. My heart sank. It wasn't surprise or shock I felt, but a deep, unsettling sadness. The details were sketchy, but it was clear. Her health had taken a nosedive. Maybe it was the stress, the hard living, or a bit of both. But she was down and it sounded serious. I wrestled with the idea of visiting her. Part of me felt like I should, for old time's sake, for the love we once shared. But another part, the part that still felt the sting of betrayal, the hurt of abandonment, held me back. It was a tug of war, memories against grievances. In the end, the grievances won. I didn't go. I told myself it was for the best, that there was nothing I could do, that I had to move on. But deep down, I wondered if it was just an excuse. A way to shield myself from facing the ruins of our shared past. Lying in bed that night, I couldn't escape the thoughts, the what-ifs. What if I had gone to see her? What if I had offered help at the store? What if things had been different? It's funny how life works. You think you've moved on, but then it throws a curveball that sends you spiraling back into the past. There I was, in a comfortable home, with a life slowly piecing itself back together, yet haunted by the ghost of a relationship that had once meant the world to me. It was a chapter that was supposed to be closed, but some stories, it seems, refuse to end quietly. It's strange how life can pivot on a single moment. She was discharged from the hospital, left to face a world that had turned its back on her. No home, no family willing to take her in. I heard about it in passing, the news delivered with a shake of the head and a cluck of the tongue. It was like she'd become a cautionary tale, a ghost story told in hushed tones. Determined to claw her way back, she started looking for any opportunity to rebuild what was lost. But opportunities were like mirages, always out of reach. The job market can be cruel, especially to those with a tarnished reputation. It didn't help that her skills were rusty, her confidence shattered. Then a glimmer of hope, a former colleague, someone from her past life, reached out. The job was nothing to brag about, far below her qualifications and experience. But it was something. So she took it, donning a uniform and a plastic smile, serving fast food to faces that sometimes recognized her. It was a fall from grace, but she faced it with a resilience that I couldn't help but acknowledge, even from a distance. Life has a way of throwing curveballs, and hers came in the form of her former lover reaching out. Maybe he was looking for redemption, or maybe just a familiar face in his own sea of troubles. But she turned him away. There was a strength in that rejection, a sign that she was still fighting, still trying to find her way on her own terms. Meanwhile, my own life was taking a different turn. I got engaged and it made the local headlines. A new chapter for me, but for her, it was a reminder of everything that had slipped through her fingers. They said she saw the news and just broke down. Right there in the middle of her shift. It was a public display of private pain. A moment of vulnerability that left her exposed and raw. The downward spiral continued, and soon, she was a shadow wandering the streets, lost in a world that seemed to have no place for her. People saw her, but they didn't really see her. She was just another face among the city's forgotten. Then one night the inevitable happened. She was found, disoriented and scared, her mind a maze of confusion and despair. The authorities had no choice but to intervene. They placed her in a shelter, a safe haven for those who've hit rock bottom. The final image that reached me was a punch to the gut. A photograph of her in that shelter, holding an old photo of us. It was from a time when smiles were easy, and love was something we thought would never fade. A single tear rolled down her cheek, tracing a path of regret and realization. It was a picture that spoke 1,000 words about choices and consequences, about love lost and lives changed. As I sat there staring at that image, I realized that this was more than just the end of her story. It was a reflection of the fragility of life, of how easily happiness can slip away. It was a reminder of the consequences of our actions, of the scars we leave on others and ourselves. And in that moment, I understood that while our paths had diverged, our story would always be intertwined, a bittersweet symphony of love, loss, and the lessons learned along the way.